Well, that did not take long. President Trump threatening to walk away from trade talks with Canada, and then boom, shakalaka, Ottawa, blink. Canada has now scrapped its controversial digital services tax, a cash grab that would have shaken down American technology giants with millions of dollars in penalties. The president says the time for pleasantries is over.
Canada is a very tough country to deal with, I will say that.
But you said,
and I love Canada.
You have the USMCA in place.
I know, but
You'll have to deal with it.
USMCA is no good if they cheat.
What does that mean?
Well, there's been things going on that we don't like, and things going on where they took advantage. And hopefully we'll be fine with Canada. I love Canada. Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state.
Wall Street liking what it sees from the White House. Stocks jumping to new highs. The S&P and NASDAQ on pace for the second straight day of record closes. So on Friday, when you read the headline about the spat with Canada, about the digital services tax, I actually...
Did you roll your eyes at me, Dagan?
No. Oh, golly, no.
Dagan never does that.
But after the fact, I was very... unmoved by what Canada was doing, because I knew instinctively we could count in hours how long it would take for them to reverse course.
Yeah, blink and you miss it. Right. They blinked and they missed it. And this is interesting. I'm actually curious if how the EU's thinking about this as well, because they've been targeting our big tech companies as well as part of their sort of tariff retaliation strategy. So look, Dagan, I think it's key that they have rolled that back. I think that's smart for negotiations. It allows us to really come forward with full faith. There's no reason why how do I say this? We are the most innovative entrepreneurship economy. The fact that Canada gets to benefit from our big tech companies doesn't mean they get to do a 3% tax. If they want to do that, they should invent some of the cool companies on their own. But guess what? They're not. We are. We're inventing these awesome tech companies that everyone else gets to benefit from. And also quickly, with these markets, Dagan, I will say, pretty astonishing. I think I read a note. We're up 28% from the April 7, April 8 bottom. That's incredible. And June really never sees record highs. You get them towards the latter. You get some January and a lot December in the back half. So the fact that you're starting to seem to, I think this market's really optimistic about some of these other trade deals coming down.
I think, and also based on the fact that so many people have missed this bounce in this second quarter and even this month alone, they've spent so much time navel gazing at the Fed, saying, oh, what's the Fed going to do? Forget about it. Get in there, make your money work. And some people have done that, and they've done very, very well. But there's still a ton of money on the sidelines that needs to go to work. And as for the trade deals, I always thought Canadians were supposed to be the nicest people in the world. But apparently not when it comes to dealing. But they caved today, and that's the right decision.
Who told you that?
Big Papa took out his stick. Okay. We knew this was going to happen on Friday. Sometimes the children like to push back a little and test the boundaries and see what they could get away with. But I knew they were not getting away with this. Nobody at this table thought they were going to get away with it. And sure enough, they dropped it. President Trump, in his amazing interview with Maria Bartiromo, had a lot of sound bites, including ones on Canada. At one point, he said, Canada relies entirely on the United States. We don't rely on Canada. And he went on to give examples of situations where they're charging our farmers substantial amounts to bring goods into the country. And so at the end of the day, I don't even know what they were thinking to impose this tax while a negotiation was happening. I guess they just wanted to see if they could get away with it, and it didn't fly. But they are going to have to work out these issues because it's an important trading relationship for us, for sure. I think the president recognizes that. But he's made it clear nobody's walking all over us anymore. And why I'm really shocked is because he has so much wind at his back right now, whether it was NATO, whether it was the operation in the Middle East and taking out Iran's nuclear facility, whether it's the economy, whether it's the big, beautiful bill, which looks like it's on its way. This is not the time to mess with him.
I just want to say and answer the question about are Canadians nice? Yes, they are. I am married to one. I know for sure that they're nice. And maybe that's the problem. You know, they backed up like that, but mostly because our economy is 15 times the size of their economy. We dominate them in almost every way. You know, everything from like culturally, you know, the music they're listening to, the TV shows they're watching. So it's no surprise here that Canada had to back down, and hopefully the EU does the same thing. But I just want to say, here's the deal. Here's the bottom line here. 78% of the goods that Canada produces gets sold into the U.S. We are their audience, their end market for so much of what they make. Whether it's oil or autos, they need us more than we need them.
We need everybody to be buyers of our treasuries, though. And there's one thing, and Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, gave an interview this morning, and he was talking about, and I know, well, we all watched it, we all saw it. Secretary Bessent thinks that the 10-year yield is too high at the moment, and he's not going to increase issuance at the long end at these levels. This is critically important because yields and what people pay to borrow and what the United States pays to borrow directly impacts the valuation on stocks. And the Treasury still has to roll over in the next year 1/3 of its debt. And the vast majority of that, or most of it, is on the short end. And so this is something that we're going to have to watch over the next year. And Secretary Bessent, he was talking about it even before he was sworn in, about right-sizing the maturity schedule. But even now, he's still saying that the 10-year rate is still too high. However, I will note that Stephanie Pomboy writes today that despite our stunning evisceration of Iran's nuclear ambitions and the president brokering of a redoubled commitment by NATO, the dollar and the U.S. Treasury have received, quote, zero ostensible benefit from that.
Yeah,
so they should
not a
have
lot of love.
Right, they should have gotten more than that. And
Absolutely.
so it shows the pressure that the dollar and our debt could be feeling.
I read an interesting note, Dagan, I did this for you, because we've talked about, when you talk about the dollar and treasuries, that whole, remember in April, American exceptionalism is over, sell America, go abroad. One note I read this morning said there has certainly been an allocation to international equities, but that's because there's such a big decline in global benchmarks for U.S., given how much would come down, that's natural. But the conclusion was we do not find any evidence to support the narrative that foreign investors have been allocating away from U.S. stocks, more than just reallocating normally as they have to their benchmark. So I love Scott Bessent. I think he's obviously one of the smartest people in the room. He's also out there saying that, you know what, we're the only country in the world where our 10-year yield is lower now than it was in January. Everyone else, their 10-year yield is higher than where it was a few months ago. So certainly that's been something on his mind.
It's interesting. And talking of Scott Bessent, have you noticed how he's kind of trying to follow up behind the president? The president says, we're going to get all these trade deals done within the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. Very good. They're all going to come to the table. And Scott Bessent is like, well, yeah, maybe. I think we'll get the ball rolling in many cases, but I don't think we're going to get an actual deal done and signed within that time frame. But it would be interesting, just to get back to these trade deals, is that within the next 2 to 3 weeks, if we could get 10 to 12 countries, if we could get India, who's had a team negotiating at the White House for a while, if we could get a major one under our belt or more, that would be excellent. China's still hanging out there. We have somewhat of a truce, I think, right now, which is fine, because that's going to take some time. But we need that, and I think Scott Bessent is interesting. He's like, you know, I'd love for it to happen the way the president wants to happen, but hey, it may not. But we'll see.
But this also goes to why the next Federal Reserve chairman is so important.
Yes.
Because so much of the debt is on the short end, and that's why it's so critical that one reason to cut rates here. So the next Fed chief, the open seats, and comes up in January 2026. So they're going to put the...
See you later.
That's not that far off.
I know, have the
July 1st.
Couple months.
14-year seat, have that individual looming over.
Yes.
JJ.
Do we need to talk about how excited you were that you spilled your water? We were so excited about the new Fed chair and treasuries.
I spilled an entire cup of water. I thought I handled it really well.
You
You did. You didn't skip a beat. It was a flood, and you just carried it.
Yeah, I built a dam with my papers like this. You couldn't see me. Taylor was
throwing
talking.
towels on the side.
I built a dam so it didn't get on my lap, and I just was doing that like that. But everything is,
worked.
all the ink is running all over the place. But
You want to do something fun?
at least it was water.
Yeah.